Okay. So this started out because of just a weird bunch of Twitter stuff, and I do think that there's truth to it. So I'm going to elaborate and see if I can try to make sense of this. So, as we see by the title, the roots of American progressivism go back deeper than Marxism. I think it's true. I'm going to say, yeah, that's true. Marxists can go ahead and give the lip service of like, well, actually, Marx wrote letters to Lincoln and all this other stuff. But the thing is, though, is that abolitionists and other more progressive threads in the United States didn't have any connection with Marxism, and the Reconstructionists had nothing to do with Marx. They may have gotten some lip services in that, but in general, they didn't have any connection. Now, I could tell you the more complicated story of how this came about or why I'm discussing it, but frankly, nobody cares about that. The fact is, though, I think it needs to be said. I think that a lot of folks will basically kind of use Marx as a heh heh, edgy bro, sort of let's own the conservatives and own the boomer cons to say that, yeah, there actually is a connection between Marxism and, what progressivism we're teaching today. In reality, the connections are, I would say, thinner than a bone. I couldn't really think of a good metaphor, so I just came up with that. But anyway, the fact is that today's, Antifa, today's, various folks who complain about abortion, this and that, have more connection to the abolitionist and to the Reconstruction era, sort of radical Republican types than they do to, Marxist Leninists or any sort of, CPUSA, whatever garbage with that. Because as we see today, generally speaking, communists, quote unquote, in the United States are not given much lip service. Not in the same way. There are people who are inspired by it, sure. You can go ahead and say Angela Davis was inspired by it. And of course, she famously defended arresting dissidents and that, including the despicable and disgusting Allen Ginsberg in Czechoslovakia. But beyond that, I think that it has to be said that if you want to discover the roots of something, you'll find that the difference between the OGs versus the neos. There's a whole big difference. It's like trying to say that pagans of today can trace their lineage back to the pagans of yesteryear. No, no, that's nonsense. At least in my opinion, today's pagans are more inspired by whatever's left over in Hinduism and more of a blend of like this Neoplatonism type nonsense and everything else like that versus the very different and fairly strict beliefs that were held by pagan societies in Scandinavia thousands of years ago. Totally different thing. The reason I say this as well, I'm kind of explaining it now as I go, but I'm trying to make it more easier to digest. I'm trying to. May not seem like it, but had to pardon me. My schizo tendencies come out. But this comes from really the idea that people will say that when I hear pagans, including, Richard Spencer, say stuff like, basically Christianity is a form of communism, and I say to myself, that's a hard line to have, especially this whole sort of idea where it's just like apparently communists could reconcile with Christians because of that's a very weird thing. I'll put it that way, and it's something that you're just like, okay, this is all ridiculousness, and I don't want to get involved with it. But I saw these posts, and I'm just like, what the hell is this? Apparently, part of this came from this guy who does claim to be a communist while still being a Christian was talking with Richard Spencer on one of those Twitter spaces. And I've heard a couple of clips of it, and I'm just like, oh, not really that surprising. But apparently people are coming out of the woodwork, and it's just more of the same old thing of like, I'm a Jew on a stick and all that sort of thing. But I think Christianity, far more, you can go ahead and say that they stole from paganism, whatnot. Yeah, fine. I'm not going to sit here and delve into that. What I will say, though, is that Christianity, of course, is now going to be a new target, depending on how much strength that's, or how much influence that's given. What do I mean by that? Well, we see, of course, links with the Spanish Civil War, where Catholic churches were burned. The nuns were, their deceased nuns were dug up. Forced, these forced, goofy marriages of old Catholic men with prostitutes, dressing up in Catholic. It was very weird stuff, and just very sacrilegious to say the least, and just basically just kind of a child going neener, neener, neener. But this is kind of what's being promoted. The United States, of course, is going to be called a Christo-fascist nation, all this sort of thing. And so we see the roots of that kind of in, as I said before, in the abolitionist movement. You think of John Brown, of course, who was a Calvinist. And, of course, Calvinism, like I said, and I have been informed that, Calvinism really is very heretical, to say the least. But I think that he, it's basically the kind of like the English Civil War, maybe as well, where it's just like Catholics versus the Prots and all that sort of thing that evolved. And of course, Calvinists, basically left, and they went, that was a big thing also in South Africa as well. A lot of Calvinists down there as well. But I digress. The thing is that what we're beginning to see is a renewed sense of, honoring criminals and, being fearful of the, or, painting certain groups of people as the real bad ones, the Christo-fascism that exists, or whatever the case may be. This is nothing new, though. Even in the 1920s and 30s, we saw the praising in like dime store novels and stuff like that of, of Dillinger or of Al Capone, stuff like that. He was seen as a folk hero. And of course, he gave out turkeys and stuff like that, Al Capone. And I've even praised it because it's one of those edgy sort of things, and you think, man, I could be that sort of guy, whatnot. But I'm trying to put that in the past a bit, because I realize that's not the proper path to go down. And I saw it as well, you'll see this, of course, with even the recent shooting that occurred, I believe, in Minneapolis, where you can look it up for yourself, but basically the story of a mother and her child being held at gunpoint by a brother, a black dude. 6-hour standoff. He shot holes in the drywall, stuff like that. This was in an apartment complex, and he was finally killed by a sniper. This went on for 6 hours, this standoff. And people are praising the guy who kept her in captivity for 6 hours. I don't feel like showing the video, but basically there is a video of her where she was held, or where basically they were holding a protest outside of the apartment complex, and she came out there, the woman who was in captivity, and was basically just like, this wasn't a George Floyd situation. Get the hell out, this and that. And of course, they're just like, well, she's going through some stuff or whatever. And then, of course, another black woman came up. And of course, we're going to touch on the racialism, but we're just going to do that and then move on. But she has black children, or at least mixed. I know that's somewhat faux pas, but I'll go ahead and say that. Why am I explaining this in a video on the roots of American progressivism, not linked with Marxism? Because they can go ahead and be inspired by Marx to a point, but they have no real connection to it. Whereas Marxist-Leninists, in general, linked up and, created at least a form of nationalism just to keep people from rioting, whether it was in Germany, whether it was in Russia, or Soviet Union, or wherever they, generally speaking, Marxist-Leninist governments had to use a bit of nationalism to keep things going. Good, bad, right or wrong. Of course, I know that I'm sure people in my audience will say Ceausescu, or they'll talk about whatever. But it did occur. This particular strain does not feel... I think they have their own version of American nationalism that I think is very, very corrosive. I'll put it that way. It's more of a, we want to be able to live the way we still live, but we want to live in racial harmony still. And that's ignoring a lot of just basic points, But they want to still hold the United States as it is. We see this with Vosh as well, of course. This idea of basically, we don't want to promote racial segregation, but, CRT is, is acceptable, but we didn't, we're not racialists, It's a very fickle thing. And it's something that all you have to do is spend a couple of moments and realize that it's all bullshit at the end of the day. But this is what is promoted. Maybe I haven't made my case very well, but screw it. I'm just going to go ahead and put out the video. And if you don't like it, that's okay. It's all right. I think I've went on long enough, though. I think that, the sort of we need to punish the South, we need to punish the Christians and whatnot, that's very much radical Republican sort of beliefs. It's very much abolitionist beliefs. And it's very much promoted today, this sort of we need to punish people. Well, we need to keep the system ultimately as it is. That's why you'll see Bo the Fifth Column, of course, continue to, kind of give lip service and give cover to various government organs, because it's like, well, I was an anarchist and whatnot, but I still support the system. Biden was going to cut back and they were going to get rid of ships and whatnot, but the House didn't let them, and this sort of thing. And it's passing the buck sort of mentality. Of course, they'll blame the Secret Service and say, why did they delete those emails? But I digress. Once again, my rants just kind of go off the curve, go off into, hyperspace. But anyway, hopefully y'all got something out of that. Hopefully, it was something that was enjoyable, that passed about 14 minutes of your time. And see you later. Goodbye.